We imagine intelligence as loud, fast, and obvious. But real intelligence usually looks nothing like that. In fact, some of its clearest signs are the ones people mistake for weaknesses: the quick answer in the meeting, the confident voice at the dinner table, the person who never seems to hesitate. That's the image we were handed. And it's almost entirely wrong, because when researchers actually study how sharp minds work, they find something quieter, slower in places, stranger in others. A kind of intelligence that hides in plain sight. It looks like distraction, it looks like doubt, it looks like sensitivity or silence, or a strange way of answering a simple question, and most people, trained to reward the loud version, walk right past it. So today we're going to redraw the picture. Not with cliches about IQ or trivia, but with the traits that keep showing up in the psychology of genuinely intelligent people, the ones almost everyone misreads. Because once you see the same picture clearly, you'll start recognizing real intelligence everywhere, sometimes uncomfortably, in yourself. The first misread trait is hesitation before answering. From the outside, it looks like the person doesn't know. In reality, it's often the exact opposite. Psychologists studying reflective thinking, including work associated with Keith Stanovich, describe a mind that pauses to check its first instinct before speaking. The fast answer is usually the cached one, the reflex the brain already had lying around. The slower answer is a considered one, weighed against what could go wrong. So while the room reads the pause as uncertainty, the pause is actually where the real thinking happens. It's not that they don't know. It's that they refuse to pretend they know more than they do. Think of the last meeting you were in. The first hand up wasn't usually the sharpest voice in the room. It was just the fastest. The sharpest voice was often the one that spoke third, quietly, after the noise settled, and somehow reframed the whole conversation in a sentence. And that leads directly into something even more misunderstood, because the next sign looks, at first glance, like a lack of confidence. The second trait is saying, "I don't know," without flinching. Most people would rather guess than admit a gap, because a guess sounds smarter in the moment. But the ability to sit calmly inside "I'm not sure" is one of the strongest markers of a well-calibrated mind. This traces back to the Dunning-Kruger effect, the classic finding that people with the least skill in an area often overestimate themselves the most, while more competent people quietly underestimate what they know. High-functioning minds have felt the sting of being wrong enough times to respect uncertainty. So when someone shrugs and says, "Honestly, I'd have to think about that," they're not weak. They're operating with an accurate map of what they actually understand. That is rarer and far more powerful than certainty. And if you've ever felt strangely calm around people who admit what they don't know, that calm is real. Your nervous system recognizes safety when it hears honesty. The third trait is changing your mind in public. Culturally, we treat this like a defeat. But in cognitive science, it's called cognitive flexibility, and it's one of the strongest predictors of problem-solving ability across almost every domain. The brain that can update its beliefs when the evidence shifts is the brain that survives complexity. The rigid mind, by contrast, spends its energy defending old positions instead of finding better ones. From the outside, updating your view looks like inconsistency. From the inside, it's precision. You're not flip-flopping, you're refusing to stay wrong on purpose. And the next sign runs even deeper than that, because it touches the way intelligent people relate to their own emotions. The fourth trait is feeling things more intensely than seems reasonable. The Polish psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski described what he called overexcitabilities, heightened sensitivities in the emotional, intellectual, sensory, and imaginative channels that consistently show up in gifted and highly creative individuals. A hard conversation lingers for days. A beautiful song can wreck you for an afternoon. A small injustice at work feels physically uncomfortable. Most people file this under too sensitive. It's actually a nervous system taking in more signal per second than average. The reframe is uncomfortable, but honest. What looks like fragility is often a wider bandwidth. The world simply hits you louder, and that's the same bandwidth that lets you notice patterns other people miss. The person who cries at the ending of a film they've seen 4 times isn't weaker than the person who shrugs. They're just wired to receive more of what was actually there. That extra bandwidth shows up socially too, which brings us to something you've probably done 1,000 times without realizing it counted. The fifth trait is reading a room within seconds. Researchers call this thin slicing, popularized by the work of Nalini Ambady and later Malcolm Gladwell. The mind's ability to make surprisingly accurate judgments from very small samples of behavior. You walk into a room and something's off. You can't say what, but by the end of the night, you're right about who was tense, who was performing, and who actually meant what they said. It feels like intuition. It's really pattern recognition running underneath language. From the outside, it looks like being moody or reading into things. From the inside, it's a mind quietly cross-referencing micro-expressions, tone, posture, and pauses against years of data. And that same silent processor drives the next one, which is often mistaken for something almost opposite. The sixth trait is needing more time alone than other people expect. Not because you dislike people, often you love them, but because your mind refuses to run at full quality without space to reset. Solitude in psychology isn't loneliness. It's the environment where consolidation happens. The default mode network, the brain circuitry active when you're not focused on the outside world, is where memories get organized, ideas get connected, and identity gets refined. Constant stimulation starves that system. Alone time feeds it. So while your absence gets read as antisocial, what's really happening is background maintenance on a machine that runs harder than most. The friends who understand this stop taking your quiet weekends personally. And this connects to something people notice about you but rarely name correctly. The seventh trait is asking questions that feel slightly off topic. In a normal conversation, most people track the surface, the topic on the table. Intelligent minds keep drifting toward the frame around the topic. Why is this the question we're asking? What are we assuming? What would change everything? This is what educators sometimes call metacognition, thinking about thinking. It's the layer above the conversation, where the interesting problems actually live. It can make you seem tangential or a bit much at dinner parties. But the reframe is simple. Everyone else is playing the game. You keep noticing the rules. That's not a social failure. That's a different resolution of vision. And speaking of vision, the next sign is one of the most misread of all. The eighth trait is enjoying being wrong, not performing humility. Actually enjoying it. Because if you were wrong, that means the world just got a little more accurate for you, and accuracy is what a curious mind is chasing in the first place. This is the essence of what researchers who study intellectual humility describe. A willingness to treat your own beliefs as hypotheses, not identity. It sounds abstract, but it feels very specific. It's the small internal spark when someone corrects you well. Most people brace against correction because it feels like a status loss. You lean into it because it feels like a status gain, a cheap upgrade to your model of reality. From outside, it looks like you don't defend yourself. From inside, you just refuse to protect an idea that's already dead. And that same non-defensiveness plays out somewhere unexpected, in your relationship to boredom. The ninth trait is a very low tolerance for shallow stimulation, not for rest and not for silliness. For emptiness, small talk that never lands, content that never resolves, meetings that could have been sentences. Your brain drifts almost against your will. Neuroscience frames this through dopamine and habituation. A mind used to solving, connecting, and understanding calibrates itself to a certain depth of reward. When the input drops below that threshold, engagement collapses. People mistake this for arrogance or attitude. It's usually just a nervous system quietly asking for something worth processing. And that same appetite for depth leads directly into the trait that ties everything together. The 10th trait is holding two opposing ideas at once, without needing to resolve them yet. F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still function. Modern research on dialectical thinking backs him up. Most minds want closure. Closure feels safe. But reality rarely offers clean, one-sided answers, and the person who can sit with contradiction, this person is kind and difficult, this decision is right and painful, this belief is useful and incomplete, sees more accurately than the person who forces a verdict. From the outside, this looks like being wishy-washy. From the inside, it's the discipline of not lying to yourself for comfort. And that discipline shows up in one last place, quietly where nobody's watching. The 11th trait is talking to yourself, in your head, all day long. Not anxiously, analytically, rehearsing a conversation before it happens, debriefing one after, explaining a concept to an imaginary student, turning an argument over and over until the shape of it is clear. Psychologists call this inner speech, and research has linked richer, more structured inner speech to stronger self-regulation, planning, and problem solving. It's essentially thinking out loud, with the sound off. From outside, you look quiet. Inside, there's a whole seminar running. And that seminar, more than almost anything else, is what people mean when they say a mind is sharp. Now step back for a moment, because what's interesting is how consistently these traits get misread by the world around them. Hesitation gets called insecurity. Sensitivity gets called weakness. Solitude gets called coldness. Changing your mind gets called flakiness. Questioning the frame gets called being difficult. Enjoying being wrong gets called naivety. Every single sign of a working mind has a nearby label that flattens it into a flaw. That's not accidental. Loud, fast, and certain is easier to celebrate on the surface, so that version gets rewarded. The quieter version has to be recognized to be valued, which is probably why, if any of this sounds like you, you've spent stretches of your life wondering why the room seemed to be graded on a different scale than the one you were using. You aren't broken. You were being measured with the wrong ruler. Real intelligence isn't a performance. It's a way of moving through information, carefully, honestly, with respect for what you don't yet know. It rarely announces itself. It shows up in the pause before the answer, the willingness to update, the odd question, the long walk alone. It's the coworker nobody notices until a real crisis hits, and suddenly they're the one everybody quietly turns to. It's the friend who says less at the dinner table but somehow remembers what you actually meant. If more than a few of these felt personal, that's worth sitting with, not as flattery, as data. Because the traits you've been quietly apologizing for might be the exact traits doing the heavy lifting inside your life. I'd love to know which of these hit closest to home for you. The pause, the sensitivity, the inner monologue, the enjoyment of being wrong. Tell me in the comments. I read every reply, and the patterns in what you share often shape what I explore next. If this reframes something for you, there's a companion piece on the channel about the quiet habits of people who think differently that pairs almost perfectly with this one. I'll let you find it next. And if you want more of this, consider subscribing and turning on the bell. I decode one hidden pattern of the mind each week, and this channel is built for the person who'd rather understand something deeply than skim 10 things loudly, because in the end, intelligence was never meant to look impressive. It was meant to look honest. And the people who wear it lightly are almost always the ones carrying the most.